Okay, so, okay, friends, let's hold our concentration, and we have, again, with Philip, journeying all the way from everywhere, the discussion of the initiations of the Arhat, becoming Arhat Krishnamurti. You know, pretty well in the book called The Initiate, or was it The Initiate in the Dark Cycle, or was it? Yeah, you know, he's pretty well named as one who's passing through the fourth degree. So, and we know that the second, third, and fourth degree can all be taken in the same life. Quite a challenge. So, let's see Philip's impression of those moments in the life of Krishnamurti when the initiations may have descended.
Okay. Well, get started. Okay. I wrote this book in 2001, and the reason I did was because I used to work in a bookstore in Australia, where we sold a lot of spiritual books, and I kept on coming across all these biographies of Krishnamurti. There's dozens of books about his life, and I thought, well, what an ideal subject for an astrological biography. And I spent about 6 months writing this book, and it was one of the most rewarding things I've ever done, and I recommend it to any astrological student. We have an accurate birth time of Krishnamurti. We have many, many different dates of life events, and so we can track his life and see how the consciousness unfolded accordingly. So for the first couple of months, I just spent time going through several biographies and just reading about him to try and get an idea of his rays. I already had a sense of some of the rays, but anyway, we'll come to that in a minute. I just want to get to this quote that Michael was just talking about. We know he is an advanced initiate who is said to have taken the fourth initiation, well, because Master J.M.H. said so. In The Initiate and the Dark Cycle book by Cyril Scott, he says, he mentions that Kay took the Arhat initiation. There's quite a few other quotes about Krishnamurti being regarded by the masters as having failed his mission in some respects, which is quite an interesting statement. But we can take it with a grain of salt anyway. But his agreement before he incarnated was to be not an amanuensis, a vehicle for the Christ, to be overshadowed by the Christ and to help bring in the new Aquarian dispensation. And DK tells us the life of the man who takes the fourth initiation or the crucifixion is usually one of great sacrifice and suffering. It is the life of the man who makes the great renunciation, and even exoterically it is seen to be strenuous, hard and painful. He has laid all, even his perfected personality, upon the altar of sacrifice and stands bereft of all. All is renounced: friends, money, reputation, character, standing in the world, family, and even life itself. So I've attempted to summarize this book as succinctly as possible, to work through the 4 initiations of Krishnamurti, because he obviously recapitulated earlier initiations when he came in. And so we have his horoscope here, Aquarius rising, most fitting for the new Aquarian dispensation. Moon, Sagittarius, Sun in Taurus, the 3 most important points of the chart, DK tells us. These planets down here, Venus in Gemini, Jupiter in Cancer, Mars in Cancer, extremely important. They were triggered and activated continually throughout his life, as was the Sun and the Moon and Uranus and Saturn, pretty much most of the planets. But we'll see as we go through, I try and apply the criteria that DK gives with the planets and the signs to the respective initiations, because The dates are given for the recapitulation of the path of probation, the first initiation, the second initiation, and so forth. But he came in at least as a second degree initiate, I think, maybe a third degree. And we'll discuss this more later when we get to those respective parts. As I said, I spent a couple of months reading biographies to come up with this ray structure, this what I call hypothetical ray structure that, of course, is still open to tweaking and discussion. Monad the second, perhaps a third, Soul the second. His master was KH, of course, as we know. Personality 4, Mental 1, Astral 2, Physical 7. This is an analysis of his chart so much today. We don't have really time to go into that, but just to lay some of that groundwork, and because we're going to mainly be looking at the initiations and applying the criteria. A good example, I think, of Aquarius rising is this statement he made, you do not want to drink the waters, but you want to find out who fashioned the vessel which contains the waters. Friend, if I say to you that I am, and another says to you that I am not the Christ, where will you be? Put aside the label, for that has no value. Drink the water if the water is clean. And he had both Uranus and Jupiter exalted in their respective signs of Scorpio and Cancer, and aspecting each other. And Uranus and Jupiter are the personality and soul rulers of his ascendant, his sole purpose, Aquarius. So his dharma was to be a group leader to bring in the new thought of the Aquarian cycle. And the masters say through these various books of Cyril Scott's, the Initiate series, that experiment was relatively successful at different times. But in some ways, Krishnamurti also rebelled and rejected his role as a world teacher as well. He was a Taurus sun, which can be slow learners. Krishnamurti was regarded as stupid at school by his teachers and very slow, but they are also persistent, stubborn, powerful, have a powerful will, a very thorough, retentive memory, much wisdom, and Buddha mind. They certainly, as far as the learning and acquisition of knowledge goes, they retain more than any other sign of the zodiac that I've seen. His Sagittarius moon, much wisdom and learning from past lives, the one-pointed disciple, direct, a tendency to revert to old forms of teaching that are no longer suitable. And this was one of the criticisms of what he accomplished and did not accomplish, that he reverted to an old form of Vedanta that was no longer suitable for the time he was teaching in, and it was too crystallized for the new cycle. Plus, he also addressed people as if they were the monad. He assumed in a naive, childlike kind of way that everyone kind of thought like he did. This is an interesting thing that I go into the book in more detail. Obviously, I'm missing out big chunks of this book, so I'm just trying to keep to the essentials here. This is a picture of him in his house in Ojai. So he's just a regular guy in blue jeans, hanging out in his back steps there. And I'm sure most of you have heard of Krishnamurti or even seen him when he was still alive, giving some of these talks in Ojai, or in Brockwood in London, or in India. Now here I have a list of that quote on page 70, I think it is, of Esoteric Astrology, of all the criteria of the planets for initiation. I'm not going to go through all these. Most of you are familiar with this. The first initiation, Vulcan and Pluto. The second initiation, Neptune, Venus and Jupiter. The third initiation, the Moon, veiling a hidden planet and Mars, etc. The fourth initiation, Mercury and Saturn. I've added a few other ones here too, a few other signs and planets that I feel, for instance, Mars at the second degree initiation is obviously going to be important because it's the ruler at a personality and soul level of Scorpio, which is the main generic sign, if you like, for the second degree. So, the criteria for initiation applied to Kay's initiation recapitulations and actual initiations. In every case, all criteria were fulfilled natally by transit and progression, or both. This is the consistent thing that I found. Of course, if we use a lot of factors when we're doing this kind of thing, we can make anything fit. But I found that the consistency of the criteria applied more than confirmed itself several times in some instances. Because Kay came in as an advanced soul, his initiation recapitulations and other ceremonies, such as being put on probation or accepted discipleship by his master, were all formalities. The ceremonies for these events were therefore not in the usual order that one might expect from an average disciple. He was definitely a special case. So I've got 8 charts we're going to look at. I've got his birth chart that we just saw, the chart of when he was put on probation, the chart of being an accepted disciple of KH, Master Kutumi, the first initiation. I've got just a synastry chart here of Leadbeater and Basant and Krishnamurti, and the last 3, the 2nd, 3rd and 4th degrees. Now, before we move on, just to mention that when Krishnamurti was discovered by Leadbeater on a beach in Chennai in India, because of his beautiful aura, Leadbeater, of course, was quite clairvoyant. This was 1909, and it was from that period, Krishnamurti was about 14 years old, till 1925, that Krishnamurti went through all the recapitulations of previous initiations, plus taking the 3rd and the 4th degree. At least that's my proposal in the book, that he took the 3rd and 4th degree in that life. I suspect he qualified for the 3rd degree in a previous life, but as DK tells us, if the astrological conditions are not right, then the initiation will be delayed to a future life where the astrological conditions are correct. And I'm not sure whether Krishnamurti, whether the hierarchy had expected him just to take the 3rd degree and be this vehicle to be overshadowed by the Christ, or whether he was expected to take the 4th degree, or whether he took it on his own initiative. And that's something that I explore in the book as well. We may have time to look at that later. So, one of the boys, of course, is Nitya, his brother, who he was very close to throughout his life. Had the most wonderful aura he had ever seen, without a particle of selfishness in it. This was about April 22, 1909. So at that time, he had Sol-Arc Venus conjunct Mars, Sol-Arc Neptune conjunct Venus, transiting Pluto conjunct progressed Mercury, etc., etc. Now we're going to go to that chart. And just to clarify that these 4-wheel charts contain the birth chart of the center wheel, the secondary progressions on the second wheel, the solar arc directions on the third wheel, and the transits on the outer wheel. So, as we all know, these 3 outer wheels move in short-term and long-term transits, and they're forever turning like a moving mandala, and triggering and activating the natal patterns, for better or worse. So, one of the key factors that was strong in this period of April 1909 was transiting Pluto exactly opposite his moon in Sagittarius. And of course, Pluto is one of the factors that relate to the first initiation. And it was over between April and January the following year that he was basically put on probation, accepted discipleship, and then took the first degree initiation. But at the first degree, it was also like the third degree, but the third degree came much later. So I'll explain that in a minute anyway. So Pluto is quite active. The moon represents the past and is also the dweller, of course. But the Pluto here represents a huge transformation and change coming into his life. Now, Transiting Pluto was also conjunct progressed Mercury, secondary progressed Mercury, both of them opposite the moon. So there was a huge lineup there. And I've written here the discovery of a spiritual brother from the past, Leadbeater, was his mentor for quite a lot of his life until he fell out with him, I think. And they both shared the same master, the Master Kuthumi, of course. And Leadbeater was also in contact with Dwajkul at that time. Dwajkul tells us in the Alice Bailey books that of Leadbeater, of his unfoldment or something like that. There was no question, hinting that Leadbeater may have been close to the third degree himself. So Mars in his horoscope is continually triggered, and Mars is also exactly conjunct the fixed star Sirius. So that's quite significant. And of course, in some ways, Mars is associated with the second degree, but it's also associated with the third, and it could be like Saturn or Capricorn, associated with all initiations. It's hard to see this. He had solar arc moon exactly opposite his Mars at that time. Transiting Saturn, the Lord of Karma, was trying his moon in Sagittarius. So there's an easy opposition triangle here. And natal Venus in late Gemini. Progressed Mercury, secondary progressed, there's the progressed Mercury I talked about before. So transiting Pluto, secondary progressed Mercury, making this line up opposite the moon. And of course the moon veils Vulcan as well. So we have both Pluto and Vulcan being activated here as he's moving towards the first degree. When he did take the first degree initiation about 6 months later, Pluto was still in orb of opposing the moon. So the activation of Pluto-Vulcan energies was still strong. Bearing in mind he's 14 years old, so the hierarchy are trying to prepare him quite quickly for his future role as a world teacher. So it was just 4 months later, and the first initiation a week after that in January 1910. Leadbeater reported to Mrs. Besant that on the night of August the 1st, he had taken the two boys in their astral bodies, this is Nietzsche and Krishnamurti, while they were asleep, to the house of the Master Kuthumi, who had put them both on probation as his pupils. I have all the sources for these quotes, but I didn't include them here, just to make it simple. So the first degree, of course, is related to Leo, and on this date, the transiting Sun was in Leo, and transiting Pluto was still opposite the Moon, as I said before, right up to the first degree in January 1910. And there's the quote: at the first initiation, the disciple has to contend with the crystallizing and destroying forces of Vulcan and Pluto. The influence of Vulcan reaches to the very depths of his nature, whilst Pluto drags to the surface and destroys all that hinders in these lower regions. So the moon being accentuated so much, or being triggered by all these other planets, Saturn trine the moon, Pluto opposite the moon, and so forth, indicates the picking up of threads from the past and ancient associations, and probably also Vow's Vulcan. Pluto, of course, is an initiator that represents the lesser burning ground. Pluto drags to the surface and destroys all that hinders, appropriate for its opposition by transit to the natal moon, and so on. This is a picture taken in Ojai back in probably the 1920s, 1930s. Now, just a minute. So here's the accepted disciple chart of Master KH that was in December of that same year, 1909. Quite a few things going on here. Again, we have Pluto still in orb of opposing the moon. We have the Sun on that day exactly conjunct Sol, Rahu, Moon in Capricorn, and then opposing Mars again in Cancer. Transiting Mars and Saturn were opposite Jupiter and Libra, in Aries opposite Libra. And there was a big lineup here with Neptune, transiting Neptune in Cancer. That's the solar ruler of Cancer, of course, conjunct Sol, Rahu, Jupiter in Cancer, conjunct Venus, progressed Venus in Cancer. So quite a lineup through there. And here we have the three significators for the second initiation, Jupiter, Venus, and Neptune. And so the criteria, for quite a few of these charts, it's like he's taking the first and second at the same time, but the second doesn't come till a couple of years later. So all the criteria for both the first and second were there. Jupiter here in Libra is also making a trine to Neptune in Gemini. And there was a description by Krishnamurti when he was young. It was very beautiful. We went to our master's house, KH. We found him and Master Moya and the Master Dwarskul all standing around talking, and they spoke very kindly. We all prostrated ourselves, and the master drew me to his knee and asked me whether I would forget myself entirely and never have a selfish thought, etc., etc. That he kissed me and passed his hand over me, and I seemed to be somehow part of him, and I felt quite different and very happy, and I've had that feeling ever since. Then they all three blessed me, and we came away. So he had some remarkable experiences at a very young age, and he was yet to meet Sanat Kumara a little bit later on, or at least I believe that's who he was referring to. So again, we have, as an accepted disciple of Master KH in that previous chart, I might have it up here a bit further. Right. Going the wrong way, excuse me. It's a bit disorienting standing here. Okay. So there are several other things going on here, and I haven't even marked all the transits and progressions in these charts. There's an incredible amount of things going on all these dates. Oops, sorry. So the secondary progressed midheaven was opposite Pluto, Dharma rising to the surface. A lot of Venus, Jupiter, and Neptune hits, as I said, more prominent at the second degree. Secondary progressed ascendant was trine Jupiter and opposite the Moon. And of course, Jupiter is very prominent in a lot of his transits and progressions for all initiations. It is the sole ruler of Aquarius, so it's going to be active and it's going to be sensitive. Excuse me. Secondary progressed Jupiter, Venus, and the midpoint in Cancer, precisely conjunct Mars in Cancer. Again, Mars taking hits. I have other ones listed here. Many Jupiter, Venus, and Neptune hits. Transiting Jupiter square, secondary progressed Venus in Cancer, transiting midheaven conjunct Jupiter, transiting Venus conjunct ascendant. We could spend days going through all these and analysing them, but just to let you know that these three planets for the second degree are strong even before that. But of course, there was a relationship, as Eleanor was saying before, I think, or Francis, of the accepted discipleship and the second degree. Generically, the accepted discipleship can equal the second degree in some ways. The event given as accepted discipleship, many indications that it was also part of taking the second degree, culminating in 1912. So from the time he was discovered by Leadbeater was 17 years up to 1925, where he allegedly took the fourth initiation. And he called it his process, which started from the third degree onwards. Incredibly painful stabbing pains in the head, in the nape of the neck, and all sorts of other phenomena that manifested. And I think from that time onwards, from 1922, 1925, he spent the rest of his life grounding that 4th degree initiation, because he lived to quite an old age, about 91, I think. There he is on a Harley, enjoying his new life in America. And of course, as Aquarius rising, he has correspondence to the soul of this nation, Aquarius. So he probably felt right at home. So I call this chart the 1st degree initiation recapitulation, and it was in the Capricorn new moon of 1910. Capricorn, of course, is the sign of initiation. Here's the Sun-Moon conjunction, but look at Uranus here, just about half a degree away from the Sun and Moon on that new moon period. And we still have Pluto strongly opposite the Moon here, so the criteria for Pluto-Vulcan is still there for the 1st degree. We have Saturn over here, Saturn-Mars in Aries, squaring the Sun-Moon-Uranus, in fact making a T-square to Sun-Moon-Uranus and progressed Mars over here in Cancer, around about 20 degrees Cancer. So that's quite a close opposition between these planets here and progressed Mars, pretty much the same degree. So again, Mars very significant. And there's a bit of a description. From the Monday evening of January the 10th until the morning of the 12th, Leadbeater and Krishna were shut up in Mrs. Besant's bedroom. They remained away from their bodies during the best part of 2 nights and a day. This event follows closely Kay's accepted discipleship ceremony only 11 days earlier, and so has similar transits and progressions. Although it is called the 1st initiation, it has all the hallmarks of part of the 2nd degree initiation and even the 3rd degree. Of course, the birth of the individual Christ, DK tells us, takes place in Capricorn at the close of the needed gestation period. On the 1st night of this initiation, many masters were present. On the 2nd night, Kay was taken to see the king, or Sanat Kumara, Lord of the World, a rare event, not something that a 1st degree or earthly initiate would experience. And so this may refer to his 1st degree systemically, or the 3rd degree. And of course, it is Sanat Kumara who is the officiating hierophant of the 3rd initiation, just as the Christ is for the first 2 initiations. So he wasn't quite ready to take the 3rd. The astrological conditions later in 1922 were far more propitious for him to do so, and of course he'd be more mature as an individual by that time. So being exposed to all this, though, at such an incredibly young age, must have been, quite an experience. And of course, he was put up on a pedestal by many theosophists and people who followed him in the Order of the Silver Star, I think it was called, which he eventually dissolved. And eventually, he just couldn't stand all the attention and dissolved that order and rebelled against the theosophists and basically trod his own path. Then the Lord turned away from me and called towards Shambhala, in the name of the one initiator, which of course is Sanat Kumara, I receive you into the brotherhood of eternal life. You are now safe forever. This is what they say about the 3rd degree. You're home and hosed once you get the 3rd degree. Before that, there's still, margin for error for wandering from the path. So, yet he hadn't taken the 3rd degree. It was pretty much, I guess, a formality perhaps in 1922 that he would go through the 3rd initiation. And the reason I think it wasn't a recapitulation was because of just the extraordinary experience that he went through at that time. I have a chapter devoted to each of his initiations in this book. And the 3rd degree is quite extraordinary, what he went through. And in fact, we'll look at one of the quotes later on. It really brings through the energy of what he was experiencing. So we have the transiting Sun, Moon, Uranus, as I said, precisely opposite Mars. We've gone through most of this here. Trine the Sun, transiting Pluto opposite the Moon, prominent at the 2nd degree. We have the Jupiter-Venus stuff, Jupiter-Venus-Neptune stuff again. Another reason for the possibility of this being part of the second initiation is that Kay was given some astral tests, although these can of course be given in varying degrees at other initiations. Kay said, I had to distinguish between the astral bodies of a living man and a dead man, between a real person and a thought image of a person, between an imitation master and a real one. And this is in Ojai. I think it's probably on the Krishnamurti Foundation community that they have there. Certainly enjoy the company of kids. And of course, his mentors, I'll just drag this picture. Oh, I can't. Oh. His mentors were Besant and Leadbeater. There's a picture of them there. Leadbeater, Annie Besant. Of course, were leading lights of the Theosophical Society, but also part of the schism of the Theosophical Society and all the politics that occurred in the 1920s, which a lot of Theosophists today don't recognise these two. There's various splinter groups. Annie Besant here, of course. Krishnamurti here. That's probably Nietzsche, his younger brother. And the synastry I have here are the three charts, a synastry between Krishnamurti, Leadbeater and Besant. Leadbeater is in the second wheel here, and Annie Besant is on the outer wheel, Krishnamurti on the inner wheel, and this is Leadbeater's planets here. A lot of stuff in Aquarius, including the Sun, Mercury, and you can see the various synastries and hits. There's a lot of squares actually from Leadbeater's planets to Krishnamurti's. Leadbeater's Mercury and Saturn, I think, are both square a trine Krishnamurti's Venus. There's some harmonious aspects and some inharmonious aspects as well. So, but they were his mentors and pretty much steered him groomed him to be this avatar, if you like, for the Theosophical Society or for the hierarchy. So finally, Leadbeater decided that, and I don't know where this came from, whether it was his own decision or whether he'd been advised by the hierarchy, to take Krishnamurti to Sicily for his second degree initiation. Anyway, they chose a good date. It was the Wesak full moon of 1912, which of course we know is a major opportunity for initiation. And of course it's in the sign of Taurus, which is Krishnamurti's sun sign. You can see there's a lot of stuff going on this full moon. And of course, we're looking again for the criteria for the second degree, Venus, Jupiter, and Neptune. So we see that natal Neptune here in Gemini is being opposed exactly by Jupiter and Sagittarius. So there's two criteria straight away, both by transit and natally. There is this extraordinary T-square here with Saturn in Scorpio in the 9th house, to Uranus and Aquarius, opposite progressed moon in Leo. And again, we have Leo and its relationship to the first degree. So that's important to look at both signs and planets. There is a grand cross to natal Uranus in Scorpio, the ascendant, and transing Saturn, which is exactly conjunct his Sun, or very closely conjunct his Sun, and squaring the descendant. So this grand cross is a pretty high point of tension. Again, there's this lineup here, transing Neptune, solar arc Jupiter, and secondary progressed Mars, all very close to each other, within half or 1 degree of each other. Very significant as far as the significators of Jupiter, Neptune and Venus. And progressed Venus too, actually. is not too far away, about 2 degrees away. And transiting Mars, it was his Mars return, probably about 4 or 5 days earlier. So that's still an orb of natal Mars, but also is between these other progressed planets or transiting planets in Cancer. So I think quite significant, this transiting Saturn conjunct his Sun, very good timing. Conjunct his Sun, triggering the Sun-Uranus opposition. In fact, this is a T-square to the ascendant natally, and explains a lot of Krishnamurti's rebellion. You know, Aquarius is the revolutionary, the rebel. And, you know, it's a very powerful chart. Uranus in Scorpio, as I said before, exalted in Scorpio in the 9th house. His most elevated planet, if we don't count the Earth, which is right next to it there. Plus the other exaltation over here, Jupiter in Cancer. And of course, this Jupiter in Cancer in the 5th house, I think, was his love of children, and also his own childlike naivety that he that I mentioned before. Okay, for time. Okay. So, Leadbeater believed the time had come for Kay to take the second initiation and settled on a place with the right magnetism and atmosphere for Kay's preparation, and it was Taormina in Sicily, which is right where the Mount Etna is, the volcano, the active volcano. So this is interesting in many ways because that area of the Mediterranean is one of the remnants of ancient Atlantis, and the second degree does have a correspondence to the Atlantean civilization. Certainly the magnetism and atmosphere would have been there for sure. Mrs. Besant being with them there, Kay's second initiation took place on the night of the full moon of May, Wesak, of course. And Mount Etna, of course, has some great stories in Greek mythology. The deadly monster Typhon was trapped under this mountain by Zeus, the god of the sky and thunder and king of the gods, and the forges of Hephaestus, which of course is Vulcan, were said to be also located underneath it. I hope to get there in the next 12 months. So all the significators for the second degree were active. Venus, Neptune, Jupiter, as I said. Strong Mars influence as always. Transiting Venus squared transiting Neptune and progressed Mars. Just a whole host of things. And I didn't put them all in here from the book. Transiting Jupiter conjunct progressed mid-heaven, opposite Neptune. Transiting Neptune conjunct Sol-Rac Jupiter, and so on and so on. I've mentioned most of these, I think. Of course, the heart center is ruled by Jupiter, which is a higher correspondence of the solar plexus ruled by Mars and Neptune, and it was certainly activated at this initiation. Venus represents the asana center for the disciple, also the throat center. And DK says, of course, at the second degree initiation, the candidate comes under the influence of the 3 planets, Neptune, Venus, and Jupiter. The 3 centers, solar plexus, heart, and throat, are all actively involved. So this is the chart again. Even the moon was in Scorpio that day, of course, being the full moon. It's not exact time for the full moon, but it's just about there. So it would have triggered Saturn, which is the point of that T-square, just some hours before. It's really quite an extraordinary chart. Okay. Transiting Saturn conjunct the Sun, as I said, the Lord of Karma weighs the soul in the balance. K's relationship to the hierarchy, which is spiritual law, the karmic nature of his mission. Saturn rules each initiation, as does Capricorn, of course. The solar arc moon in Capricorn was there for a large portion of Krishnamurti's life, 30 years, of course, for each solar arc transit. Saturn in Scorpio was opposed by transiting Saturn, etc., etc. There's a very good quote here that relates to some of the things that other speakers have mentioned so far this weekend. about the pairs of opposites and the resolution of the pairs of opposites through the 6 pairs of signs of the zodiac and how important they are. And relating to the second degree, DK says Earth and water, Taurus and Scorpio, must be blended and related, and it is this truth connected with these 2 signs of the zodiac which lies behind all teaching upon baptism and purification. The earthly material desires of Taurus must in due time be brought under the influence of the purifying water in Scorpio. Baptism by water, a name for the second initiation, needs a preparatory period of testing and purification, and this the experience in Scorpio is intended to give. So I think we're saying earlier on today, if you're Scorpio rising in your horoscope, it doesn't mean to say necessarily that you're going to take the second degree in this lifetime, but you're certainly being prepared for it. Or it could be for someone too that is more advanced, that someone going for the 4th degree might have Scorpio rising. But of course that would be very rare. Also, I mentioned the Uranus opposite the progressed moon, making a T-square to Saturn. Uranus, of course, is the Hierophant of the mysteries, rules Aquarius rising, and triggers the effects generated from the past, represented by the progressed moon. So we have Transit Uranus, progressed moon, T-square Saturn. I think it's a very, very important pattern for this initiation. Now, of course, I'm not even mentioning what's been going on in his life in between these initiations. Obviously, he's doing lots of talks for the Theosophical Society. He's travelling around the world. He's like a guru who's fated everywhere, through India, England, United States. He talks to thousands of people. I think he used to speak at the Hollywood Bowl and places like that too. So he's world famous. And of course, there was a huge fiasco in Sydney in Australia where they built a building that was supposed to, the Theosophists built this building in Balmoral in one of the suburbs of Sydney that was supposed to be in anticipation of the return of the Christ coming across the Pacific Ocean, and the Sydney newspapers had a field day with it, just tore it apart. And all the glamours of the Theosophical Society were coming to the surface at that time. They thought they were taking high initiations. I believe several of them thought that in 1925, for instance, when Krishnamurti took the 4th, that they all had done as well. And such and such was going to be the Mahachowan and the 6th root race, and someone was going to be this, and it was all pretty silly. But it's quite instructive on the glamours of initiation and where the tendency for us to place ourselves ahead of where we really are. And this goes back to the whole Promethean myth of humanity stealing fire from the gods. So the natal sun was heavily aspected by several planets. This was a transformative period for Krishnamurti, personality-wise. The dispositor of the Taurus sun, of course, is Venus, which was being conjoined by transiting Pluto, the planet of transformation and regeneration. So you can have your sun being squared by Pluto, and that's a tough enough transit as it is, but you can also have the ruler of your sun being squared by Pluto, and that's equally transformative, if not more so. There's an idealized, photoshopped picture here of Krishnamurti. I think it looks like Ojai again is speaking. The 3rd degree initiation, prior to the Leo new moon in 1922, Kay had just recently relocated to Ojai, California in the previous month of July. He said, I meditated regularly for about 30 minutes every morning. I set about consciously to annihilate the wrong accumulations of the past years. The main interest on that high plane, the Buddhic, was to serve the Lord Maitreya and the Masters. During that period of less than 3 weeks, I concentrated to keep in mind the image of the Lord Maitreya throughout the entire day. I found that I was getting calmer and more serene. Kay then explains the neck pain which culminated on the 19th. I was in everything, or rather everything was in me, inanimate and animate, the mountain, the worm, and all breathing things. My head was pretty bad, and the top part felt as though many needles were being driven in. And then there's a description by someone else of what actually happened. And it's worth reading through because it's quite a moving testimony, really, to what happened. On the evening of Thursday the 17th, Krishna felt a little tired and restless, and we noticed in the middle of the nape of his neck a painful lump of what seemed to be a contracted muscle about the size of a large marble. The next morning found Krishna apparently very ill, for he is lying on the bed, tossing about and moaning as if he were in great pain. A fit of trembling and shivering came upon him, and he would clench his teeth and grip his hands tight to ward off the shivering. Krishna complained of frightful heat. Some process was going on in Krishna's body as a result of influences directed from planes other than the physical. But Sunday, the third day, was the worst day, and we saw the glorious climax. Towards 6 o'clock he quietened down, then suddenly the whole house seemed full of a terrific force, and Krishna was as if possessed. He would have none of us near him and began to complain bitterly of the dirt of everyone around. He was sobbing aloud. We dared not touch him, and he knew not what to do. Then the feeling came upon us of an impending climax. All our thoughts and emotions were tense with a strangely peaceful expectation of some great event. The place seemed to be filled with a great presence. I knew that the great Lord of all our hearts had come himself. All felt the splendour of his presence. We heard divine music softly playing. All of us heard though hidden from us, were the Gandharvas, the deitic beings. So here's the chart, and we're looking for Moon, Mars. Mercury, Saturn for the fourth, Moon, Mars for the third. And we have the progressed moon is 1 degree away from the natal moon. It's just 1 month before his progressed moon return. So he's 27 years old. Whoops. So that's one of the most significant things. And of course, the progressed moon is conjunct the progressed mid-heaven as well, which is one of the most important angles of the chart. And they are opposite. Transiting Pluto's moved on by this time, of course, but they are opposite the moon in Gemini at the exact time of the full moon. So that was being activated again, that entire axis that Pluto was activating before. So the moon is active both here and here. And here we have transiting Pluto moved up to almost exactly conjunct Mars in Cancer, within about 0.5 degree. And also solar arc Neptune is in the picture, and secondary progressed Venus. Again, these couple of planets that relate to the 2nd degree still hanging around, as it were. So Mars being activated, Moon being activated, there's the criteria, and very convincingly, I think, given the fact that Mars was quite strong in the other initiations as well. Uranus is over here in Pisces, making a trine to Mars. Saturn is up here in Libra, making an exact square to Jupiter in Cancer. Transiting Jupiter in Libra is trine the ascendant, which it rules esoterically, so that's quite significant. Solar arc Saturn in Scorpio is exactly opposite natal Mercury in Taurus. And that natal Mercury in Taurus is also conjunct the fixed star Alcyone, which is the star of intelligence, of course, and Krishnamurti wrote a book which he pen-named as being by Alcyone, calling himself Alcyone. So really a lot of stuff going on in that 3rd degree chart. Now, at 14, as we said before, Kay was given the preview of the 3rd degree. He travelled to Shambhala, met Sanat Kumara, apparently, in the astral, now this was the real thing, either taking of this initiation for the first time or its recapitulation. The experience was so intense that it seems like this initiation was taken in that life, but that he had already qualified for the third degree in a previous life. It was just more or less a formality for the astrological timing. The whole process lasted for 3 days, which of course corresponds to the third degree, the 3 roads of St. Paul on the road to Damascus, and the 3 days of Jonah in the belly of the whale, which DK tells us is symbolic of the third degree. Disciples who have undergone the third initiation and have climbed the Mount of Transfiguration can, from that high point, glimpse the radiance of the subjective centre of energy, the central spiritual sun of the secret doctrine, and so gain a flash of realization as to the meaning of the word life. So the Moon Mars caused a fearful conflict at the third initiation, and obviously it wasn't just that 3-day period, it was probably a longer period that before he became normal again. I mentioned all these things. Of course, Pluto was also conjunct Sirius as well as Mars. Don't forget that Mars was like half a degree away from Sirius. Pluto was conjunct all these planets until September 1924, the end of K's process preceding the fourth initiation. But that process resumed after the fourth initiation as well. Pluto would have been responsible for the rising of Kundalini, which put K through so much pain. That's Kundalini coming up the spine and creating a pain at the base of the skull. The influence of Sirius is not consciously felt until after the third initiation, when the true nature of the spirit aspect begins to dawn upon the liberated, intuitive perception of the initiate. For the advanced initiate in this sign, and after the third initiation, Sirius becomes a major life factor. And the initiation experience occurred with transiting Sun in Leo, the major sign for Sirian influence. And as most of us know, this quote, August, which is ruled by Leo, is the month of the dog star or of Sirius. Also, Aquarius Leo have a close connection to the third initiation. I'm not going to read all that. We'll skip to the next, fourth degree. Quite a good picture here of Krishnamurti in his study at Ojai. A bit pixelated. So, in 1922, his process begins all the way through to 1925. There's some descriptions here of his sensitivity and whether K was, as I said before, was only meant to take the third degree initiation or expected to take the third initiation in that lifetime and not go on to take the fourth. I think I read in one of the initiate books that he took the fourth on his own volition, his own choice. And so the bulk of the world initiates climax their experience in Aquarius and become liberated world servers. They turn their backs upon all further progress for themselves in this cycle and on all satisfaction of their own spiritual aspiration, and become carriers of the waters of life to humanity, joining thus the ranks of the hierarchy. And so it's speculated whether he didn't do that and he actually went on to take the fourth as with his spiritual ambition, if there's such a thing, or if he was in such a space at that time. It's something to reflect on anyway. He spent an agonizing 3 weeks with his process starting again in August 1924. The progressed Sun was square the Moon's nodes in Pisces Virgo, emphasizing the Piscean qualities of sacrifice and suffering. Transiting Jupiter was opposite Pluto, and that may have been a trigger in the resumption of the process. Jupiter is again sole ruler of the rising sign, and Pluto is a major transformational agent with its relation to the base of the spine center. And finally we come to the fourth initiation, which was Wesak 1925. And I meant to say before that 1925 decade tells us also was when the hierarchy moved up to the Buddhic plane from the mental plane. They'd been on the mental plane since Atlantean days. So this was a huge shift, and I suspect that the Master Rakotsi took his post as the Mahachohan in 1925 as well, in preparation for Moya and Kutumi taking their respective posts of the Manu and the Christ for the sixth root race to come. And that's another story anyway, but a lot of things were going on at that time, and of course it was a once-in-a-century conclave by the masters, or was it a Shambhala meeting? I think it was a Shambhala meeting. So we're looking for the fourth degree, Mercury and Saturn. Again, Mercury and Saturn for the disciple at a much earlier stage, but of course at the fourth degree, Mercury and Saturn come back in a different way. We can see this is the Wesak full moon, Taurus full moon chart. Then we have the Sun practically conjunct his own Sun, opposite the moon, of course. And and conjunct natal Uranus exactly. Very important. Uranus has been active in at least two of the initiations that we looked at before, with that new moon in Capricorn that we looked at before over here. So Saturn up here in Scorpio, it's just after his Saturn return, he has Saturn in earlier degrees of Scorpio, is squaring exactly solar arc Mars in Leo. There's that Mars again. So that's one part of the criteria. And the other part is, well, go to here first. We have Pluto, transing Pluto, progressed Jupiter, and natal Mars lining up again. And I think there was a progressed Mercury somewhere. Where a progressed Mercury is in the mix. It's just past natal Mars by about a degree. Did I find a Mercury connection here or not? Natal Mercury is hidden here, 28, 29 Taurus. Doesn't seem to be anything natally or by progression, but I'm sure I found something. Maybe I missed it from the book when I was... We'll go to the next page where it lists a few of these things. Full moon exactly conjunct Uranus, the ascendant ruler Uranus, exalted in Scorpio, takes a direct hit from the full moon. Uranus, of course, is the occult initiator into the mysteries. Uranus leads the soul to the burning ground during the final stages of the path, when the fire of Aries and the fires engendered through the potency of Uranus produce the flaming heat of the final burning ground. Through this burning ground, the initiate has finally to pass. Uranus rules the occult way and is, in an esoteric sense, connected with the Hierophant of the mysteries of initiation. And, of course, Scorpio relates to the fourth creative hierarchy, as Eva was talking about this morning, the fourth degree, which is the goal for humanity. Now we mentioned a few of these things. I'm going to skip some of this, and just for our final consideration, at this time he had progressed ascendant in Pisces, square the moon, and so here's the progressed ascendant down here in late Pisces, making a square to the moon and also to natal Venus. More or less a T-square there. And I think the progressed planets are probably the more esoteric things to trace through our unfoldment. You know, transits are important. Solar arc directions, tend to be more to do with events, but secondary progressions are far more subjective, I think. And So if your ascendant is your sole purpose in any given lifetime, then your progressed ascendant has to be meaningful. And this quote, just back here, is suggestive. A rare few consummate the experience of life upon the three crosses in the sign of Pisces, and so become world saviours. They know then that, and only then, the highest aspect of the first ray, as it expresses itself through the activity of death. Those who achieve in Pisces and make the higher and further grade in their development pass into that centre which we have given the name of Shambhala. So, the ascendant is the spiritual goal, the progressed ascendant in Pisces. Those who achieve in Pisces may also explain why K turned his back on hierarchy. The progressed ascendant was at the apex of a T-square to Moon, natal Moon Sag and Venus in Gemini, heavily aspected by transits and progressions, and K's cross of initiation was basically the crucifixion initiation. He took the 4th degree, according to this source in the initiate books and the so-called English master JMH. Theme of death, the highest aspect of the first rays, expresses itself through the activity of death. Exactly 6 months later, K's brother Nietzsche died, which completely devastated Krishnamurti for a couple of years, I think. He was really torn up by it. 11th of August 1925, Mrs. Besant announced that Krishnaji was one of a small group who had recently reached the stage of arhatship. K's process continued throughout his life, but it took a while to ground. So I think if anyone was an arhat, it was Krishnamurti, but all the others, I don't think so. You have to be a pretty influential world figure to really, and like Sir Francis Bacon, who was a triple Aquarian, Aquarius rising, Aquarius sun, I think Mercury and Aquarius as well. Aquarius seems to have a relationship to the 4th initiation. I think Michael mentioned this earlier on today. The rulers of Aquarius are of peculiar interest. They constitute an effective group of planets and bring in the influences of the 7th, 2nd and 4th rays. These are preeminently the rays which determine the final stages of man's progress, as well as the initial stages being more potent at the beginning of the evolutionary path, etc., etc. They determine the final stages and happenings of the path of initiation. And it goes on to talk about the rays a bit more there. These rays associated with Aquarius determine the final stages and happenings of the path of initiation. The rulers of these rays, Uranus, Jupiter and Mercury, are all prominent by transit as described above. So it's interesting, isn't it? Pisces and Aquarius both associated with the 4th degree. But Aquarius generally is associated with the 3rd degree. So Krishnamurti had a Ray 2 soul, a Ray 4 personality, and a Ray 7 physical body corresponding to all these rulers of rays. And there you have it. So, any discussion or questions before we...
Why did he turn his back on the hierarchy?
Well, he kind of rebelled with all the hoopla going on around him. Excuse me?
They wanted him to be the vehicle for the return.
They did, and he successfully did that throughout his life at different stages of his life. They worked on him between 1925 and 1980s when he disincarnated at various times. The people have testified to seeing him at talks and feeling the energy pouring through, and so they kind of came in and out, as it were. But in the 1930s, that period was the time that he rejected the masters and the hierarchy, but they were still working with him for the rest of his life, I think.
Philip, have you ever, did you investigate the monadic point for him during any of these higher initiations?
I can't remember. I wrote the book 15 years
ago. Something like that, sort of,
the
Scorpio point.
Conjunct Uranus and the most elevated planet in his chart. So, again, you have Scorpio, the 4th creative hierarchy, the 4th initiation.
Yeah.
It's quite relevant.
So. Did you ever think that he might have been responding to a first-ray monad.
No, I didn't, but he could.
I don't know. I've thought about that quite a bit because it takes a lot of.
He had a first-ray mind, and some of the pictures of him here is a really powerful face.
Yeah, I just figured he's on the first sub-ray of the second-ray soul. Mm-hmm. It seems to me.
Yeah.
Because that's the austere wisdom line. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes I think that what gave him that incredible independence to sort of take the path of a Pratyeka Buddha and do it himself, you know. I was wondering if he didn't reject out of the first ray coming quite high in his system.
I think you have a write-up of that, of Krishnamurti on Makara, don't you?
I may. It was a long time ago. One forgets what one writes. But it comes back to haunt you, you know. Well, excellent.
The Rose has a question.
Yes.
I'm not so sure that he turned his back on the hierarchy exactly. I mean, he disbanded the Order of the Star because I think it's more the group around him was kind of more the failure than him himself, because they had turned him into this, you know, really high figure that they just were devoting themselves to versus, you know, doing their own.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. But the Master JMH makes some other comments in the book here that I quote that says more so that he did reject them for a period, and it may have been out of the rebelliousness of everything going on around him, but I can't remember the exact quote.
Something like, we want him to lead them to us, and he's leading them away from us.
He wanted to destroy the whole concept of the authority of the masters, and yet the masters criticized him for not leading people any kind of alternative, or leaving them dangling and without any kind of, you know, so that was one of the main criticisms of his what he did.
Yeah, without a bridge. The other question is, it seemed like in this that the in these initiations seem to cause such physical reactions. I don't think that would be a typical normal initiatory process for each person, or is it that this was like initiations he was taking prematurely to do this work and his physical vehicles were not ready in a way, you know, to go through these processes without such discomfort?
I believe from what I've read and heard over the years that they are quite uncomfortable experiences, especially the second degree. It can be an emotionally tumultuous time, and people can be like they're on LSD for 2 weeks, you know, hallucinating, getting incredible visions, all things to do with the astral body being super stimulated, for instance. And but it may be different for different people and different ray lines. But if the Moon and Mars are going to be creating a fearful conflict, preparing for the third degree, then you're really warring with the lunar lords, and trying to gain control of them. So there's going to be some pain there, I think. You know, no matter how aware you are, it's going to just the habit of carrying the lunar lords for so long and being ruled by them and not ruling over them, I guess. Yeah.
That was a great study.
Speculate.
Great study. Thank you, Philip.
All right.
So we've had some really fine application of the principles, and we've laid out a lot of excellent theory, and by now I think you have a pretty good idea of how these planets and signs and rays are working in the life of real people, and, you know, of course, by extension, in our own lives. So a lot to absorb today, I realize. So we'll come back tomorrow, and there will be more interesting lectures, and you'll have more time to talk about the planets in your chart. So let's just make it brief with 1 Om. 1 Om for the road. Show me the way to go home. And we'll hope you get some sleep, and I'll participate in that wish for myself. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, all presenters, very coherent and very useful. Good night.